The Senate will come to order. Senator Muhammad.
Mr. President, I impose a call of the Senate.
The Senate is now under call. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant-at-Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, if you would be so kind as to stand. In our Senate tradition, we always start with prayer, and today's chaplain is Reverend Sarah Morse, and she's from Hazel Park United Church of Christ in St. Paul. As a gentle reminder, following the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good morning. Let us pray. God of many names, we come to you in this time filled with curiosity and concern, wonder and grief, anticipation and regret, hope and longing. We come to you as a people wanting more and sighing when only able to do just enough, if that. We come to you in this session marked with rules, procedures, and policies, economic forecasts, and debate, so that our work can be done with fierce belief and deep compassion for a greater good to serve and to acknowledge that we too are a part of something much bigger than ourselves. As we turn then to our work, may we listen for clarity and speak with precision. May wisdom of opinion and transparency of fact allow for accountability. And may the presence of the holy guide us in our work rather than in name only. In a season of lengthening days, in a season that pushes us to ponder and reflect, may we recognize unequivocally that God's love does in fact surpass all understanding, and that we are instruments of that love in a time such as this. Let us not squander nor snuff out the light of promise and possibility. Let us be who you have called us to be, made in an image filled with grace and kindness. For our sake and for the sake of humanity, may it be so. And let the people say, Amen.
Thank you, members. The secretary will take the roll.
Abler, Anderson, Barr, Bolden, Carlson, Champion, Clark, Coleman, Swadzinski, Dames, Dibble, Dornick, Draheim, Drazkowski, Duckworth, Eichhorn, Farnsworth, Fateh, Frentz, Green, Grunhagen, Gustafson, Hoschild, Herr, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Jasinski, Johnson, Johnson Stewart, Klein, Coran, Kroon, Kunish, Kupek, Lang, Latz, Liskey, Limmer, Lucero, Mann, Marty, Matthews, May Quaid, McEwen, Miller, Mitchell, Mohammed, Murphy, Nelson, Umuverbaten, Pappas, Pa, Port, Pratt, Putnam, Rarick, Rasmussen, Rest, Seeberger, Utke, Weber, Wiesenberg, Westland, Westrom, Wickland, Zhang.
Members, a quorum is present. Members, if you'd like to follow along, I'm reading from today's Senate agenda, dated Monday, March 3rd, 2025. We will begin with the third order of business, messages from the House. The Secretary will read the message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following House files herewith transmitted. House File Number 72 and 289. Signed, Patrick Duffy Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Members, no action is required. The fourth order of business, first reading of House bills. The House files have been given this first reading and referred as indicated. Members, we'll now proceed to the fifth order of business, reports of committees. Senator Murphy for a motion to adopt committee reports.
Mr. President, I move the committee reports printed in the agenda be adopted with the exception of the report pertaining to appointments.
On the adoption of committee reports, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, I will now call on Senator Murphy to lay the appointments on the table. Senator Murphy.
Mr. President, I move that the committee report pertaining to appointments be laid on the table.
To that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, will now proceed to the sixth order of business, which is second reading of Senate bills. The Secretary will read the Senate file numbers.
Senate File Numbers 1312 and 1758.
The Senate files have been given their second reading. Members, will now proceed to the eighth order of business, which is the introduction and first reading of Senate bills. The bills listed on today's introduction calendar are given their first reading and referred as indicated with the following changes. Members, if you go to page number 10, if you give me a moment so I can get to page number 10, you'll see Senate File Number 2120, which is referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. And if you go to the next page, which is on page number 11, Senate File Number 2125, that bill has been referred to the Committee on Human Services. Members, as I mentioned, the bills listed on the introduction calendar are given their first reading and referred as indicated with the identified changes. Members, we'll now proceed to the ninth order of business. We will adopt the author's motion as one motion. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, I will now call on Senator Nelson for a motion. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate File 916 be withdrawn from the Committee on Education Policy, given its second reading, and placed on general orders, and I request a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Nelson, anything else you want to say to that motion, or before I go forward? Senator Nelson, anything else you want to say about that motion?
Thank you, Mr. President. There's an urgency around this bill today. It's clear. The House is acting today on this bill. It is protecting women in women's sports. State tournaments are starting across the state, and we have a chance today to show Minnesota that we will support women and girls. They have a place in our state. I ask for a yes vote, Mr. President. I was the first class. I was in high school when women's sports became a reality because of Title IX. Without Title IX, women's sports would not have become a reality when I was in high school. I can go into all the reasons why before that, but it was essential that women's sports remain for women. Women's dignity, their respect, and their privacy. And I think every one of us in this chamber knows how important it is that we empower girls and women and that we protect their class as under Title IX. This is simply asking that we get this bill out of committee and on general orders where we can debate this. Thank you.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I am going to ask members to vote no on the motion brought to us by Senator Nelson. This is a piece of policy that is in the education policy bill right now. And while some might argue a sense of urgency because of activities happening in the House today, this is the Minnesota Senate. And we will, as we do, in due time, take up the issues before this body, not with rush and not with urgency, but with thoughtfulness and deliberation. This is a policy that I could speak to the merits of, but instead for today, I will ask members to vote no to allow the Senate to take up the issue with deliberation and thoughtfulness. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I impose a call of the Senate for the remainder of the motion.
The Senate is now under call. Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant-at-Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, I am now going to Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate File 916 is common sense. I think even any of the senators sitting here on the floor talking with their neighbors, talking with their friends, talking with their family would agree that having biological males play in women's sports makes no sense. The majority of Minnesotans would like to keep that separate also. I have 3 daughters who played hockey, and that's a pretty physical sport. And there have been kids that are getting injured when they're having males play in their female sports. So we fought so hard for Title IX and fighting to protect women and to empower women. This bill does just that. It protects women, it empowers women. I think any of us sitting on the floor have to ask ourselves, if you have a little girl playing in track and field or soccer or hockey, or would you want a biological male competing against your child? And that's what Senator Nelson's bill does. It protects and empowers our young girls. Thank you.
Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members, I'm going to ask that we vote no, because let's actually talk about the protection offered by this bill. It requires, if there is a dispute about the sex of the student, whose dispute, whom knows, then that child is required to go to an internal and external reproductive exam. 7-year-old girls being given invasive vaginal exams so they can prove to another person that they have ovaries. I don't even think there's doctors that do that. Then they also have to have
Mr. President,
a test of their testosterone
Mr.
and an
President, that's
analysis
not
of their
happening.
chromosomes.
They do not do invasive vaginal
Hey,
exams.
Mr. President.
Hold on.
They do not do
Hold-
that.
hold-
She's wrong. She
Listen,
can't be saying that.
Listen, when I say hold, I mean hold. That's not a suggestion. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible. Members, let me remind us, because we have to get back into the notion of being respectful on the Senate floor. Here's the thing. If you have something to say, if you want to stand, it has to be based on a rule in order to interrupt someone. You just can't interrupt a person just because you say that they are saying something wrong. So listen, you can kindly look at the rule and I'll be happy to consider it. But members, let's also make sure that when we are debating an issue, that we are debating the issue that is before the body. What is before the body, members, is pursuant to our temporary rules of the Senate, Rule 5.1. That's what's before the body, is only the motion, not the substance of the motion, only the motion. Okay? So members, let's remember that. And if you look at Rule 5.1, it says before the applicable deadline for committee action on a bill, a majority of the whole Senate may recall the bill from a committee and re-refer to any committee or place it on general orders. So the motion before us, Senator Nelson's motion to place her bill on general orders. With that being said, members, let's remember to be respectful, even if it's something that we feel very passionate about. I understand. All right? Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm going to repeat what I said before I was interrupted. This bill explicitly states that a signed physician's statement that there was an internal
Mr. President.
and external
Point of order.
investigation of a student's anatomy.
Hold on, please. Senator Liskey.
Mr. President, point of order or point of parliamentary inquiry.
Please state the rule and what your inquiry is.
So my inquiry is related to what you just said. The motion on the floor is relating to a motion to general orders, and we're now discussing the merits of the underlying bill, which is not what we're supposed to be discussing. Is that correct?
Members, we are speaking to the motion that is before the body. I did give some leeway when some other people started talking about other things that wasn't just specifically to the motion itself. So I want to be fair and give you some leeway, but not total leeway. So I'm going to remind us that the motion before the body is Rule 5.1. It only speaks to the motion. Please. I've given some leeway, but let's not go too far. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate you clarifying because, yes, folks did take leeway. We had conversations about Title IX. We had the misgendering of students. And it's clear that it's very upsetting to some of my colleagues in this room that discussing what is in the bill and what would happen with the bill Like, I get that, but that's what it is. And that's why we should vote no on this motion, Mr. President. The internal anatomy investigations of 7-year-old girls is disgusting, and we should not be legislating that from this body. And certainly, if we're going to have this debate, this hateful and cruel debate, which, by the way, every single time a legislature does this, kids want to kill themselves. That is scientific research that has shown every single time this is taken up on a legislative floor, calls to suicide hotlines increase. So even having this today is harmful, Mr. President. And I understand we want to move forward, but I genuinely cannot believe that we are having this conversation today. It is so harmful to children. But if we are going to have this conversation, it should happen in a committee where it belongs and not on the floor, not because of some press opportunity, not because of some hate rally, but where it belongs in committee. Thank you.
Members, another gentle reminder. We have to make sure that we are debating the matter that is before the body. I did provide some leeway earlier, but I would like to make sure that that leeway is much more limited and restrained. We know that we have a committee, and that committee can debate those issues. And so the issue before the body is whether we should pull it from the committee and place it on general orders. With that being said, I'm going back to my list. Senator Grudenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I rise in support of Senator Nelson's motion to bring this as a matter of urgency. Members, I'd say for over 100 years, we have defined participation in sports based on chromosomes, medical science, and biology. We're not discriminating against anybody. I'm the last person to spew hate. Okay, spent 13 years in jail ministry trying to help those people, and different ones. And the thing is that all we're trying to do is to protect young girls in this bill, and we've seen injuries, we've seen them lose out on scholarships and a host of other things. And again, everybody can participate in the sport that they want depending on their chromosomes and biology. It's really that simple. So let's protect women's sports and their opportunities rather than confuse the issue. And again, for over 100 years, we haven't confused the issue, so please vote yes and support Senator Nelson's bill, or get a promise that she will have it heard in committee. Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've heard on the floor today that just because the other body is talking about this doesn't mean that it should be urgent for us. And I would say that it should be urgent. This is long overdue. Almost 2 years ago, I got up on this very floor and I spoke about this topic. We've been talking long enough, Mr. President. Back then, I talked about my daughter who runs cross country. Well, I think it's important to revisit that. So I looked up some numbers, and the Class AA girls cross country winner in 2024 won the race, Mr. President, at a pace of 18 minutes, 11 seconds. This was fast, much faster than I could run it. The winning boy in that race won it at 17:28. But that's not the important thing, Mr. President. Out of 60 boys that ran that race, the 45th boy ran at 18:07, which means, Mr. President, that the 45th boy in the Class AA race would have beat every single girl in that race.
Hold on, Senator Farnsworth. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. A point of parliamentary inquiry. Can you remind the body one more time under what rule we're operating and the limits of our debate?
Thank you, Senator Murphy. That will be a good time for me to remind us again. I know I've been doing it over and over again, but it sounds like we are getting further and further away from the underlining debate here. And the only debate before the body pursuant to Rule 5.1 is whether is to recall this bill from the committee and place it on general orders. That is the only thing before the body, not the substance of time, and all the other things. I'm trying to be as thoughtful because I want to be as balanced as possible, but you're getting further and further away. So Senator Farnsworth and everyone, not just you, please, let's not make this any more difficult. The issue before the body is only Rule 5.1.
Mr. President.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. President.
For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Point of parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry and the rule.
Thank you, Mr. President. Point of parliamentary inquiry. Under Rule 5, my read is that members could talk about why they would like this bill to be withdrawn from committee and advance it to general orders, and they can talk about why it's important to do it in a timely manner. This is something that the Senate has debated on these motions for a long time, and it's common custom and usage to be able to talk about why they want to move the bill forward, the contents of the bill, and everything. And so I just, Mr. President, I want to make sure my understanding is correct.
Senator Rasmussen, one of the things that I've tried to make very clear is that it is okay for us to debate the underlying motion, and the motion is to take it from the committee and bring it to general orders. One can even suggest that it's timely because there are things going on when you think in terms of competition, and that we should do it right away. But the moment that we start comparing statistics and times and all the other stuff, now you're getting into the substance of the bill and not necessarily connecting it to the motion. So everything must be connected to the motion only. So I'm asking you, as I'm asking the entire body, not to stray too far away. Right now, we are on Gilligan's Island, and I'm asking us to come back to the state of Minnesota because we are too far away. So not that I don't want you to be able to say, hey, it's important for us to talk about this now, but the other statistics and the other things, that goes to the underlying notion as to whether a bill should be passed or not. So hopefully that has given you enough guidance. Senator Farnsworth, I'm sure that you're going to adhere, and I'm just trusting that you're going to do that. Senator Farnsworth.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And if I had been given 5 more seconds, I would have reached the point where I was telling you why it was so urgent. Because, Mr. President, track season starts next week. And so that's why I was going through the statistics that the 45th place boy would have beat every single girl. And with track season starting next week, this is urgent because our girls deserve to have the same right to compete. They deserve to have the same right to earn scholarships and compete against other girls. And that was my point, Mr. President. It was to the actual motion that this is urgent, that this is long overdue, Mr. President. And so I encourage members to support Senator Nelson's motion.
I'm now going to Senator Klein. Senator Klein and everyone else, I'm just reminding us again, the motion that is before the body is only whether the bill should be taken from the committee and placed on general orders. Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for that reminder, and I'll speak to the motion. There's been proposed that this is urgent, so urgent, in fact, that we should abrogate the procedures of this Senate and pull from a committee where the people of Minnesota would have the opportunity to testify and offer wisdom to committee members. Members of that committee who petitioned to become a part of that committee and have that unique set of opportunities to speak to legislation would be deprived of their voice in that matter. We only do that for the most alarming and urgent matters in this Senate, therefore the nature of the motion. It's not been made a good case that we should interrupt Senate procedures, deprive the people of Minnesota from every spectrum of this debate from their voice, and I would urge a no vote on the bill.
Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, I rise to support Senator Nelson's motion and the urgency to move this bill to protect girls' sports in Minnesota. As a father of twin daughters that immensely enjoyed their sports opportunity in our state, and on behalf of all my constituents and their daughters, we have discussed this issue long enough. We continue to hear more and more stories in the news. I just saw one this morning in Virginia. Somebody that was a biological male disguised or used the claim of being a female now to be in the locker room, to the shock and awe of the parents and the young
Point
ladies
of order,
that
Mr.
were
President.
in there. Mr. President,
Hold on. For what purpose do you rise? Senator Westland, and if you identify the rules. Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. President. You have shown great forbearance today, and you've reminded members repeatedly. I'm going to go back to the Rule 5 about sticking to the motion. We are continuing to vary from what our point is here, and I would ask, Mr. President, that we stick to the underlying motion.
Advice, Mr. President?
There's no need for advice because I didn't ask for any advice. For what purpose do you rise outside of that, unless you can point to a rule, because I didn't ask for advice?
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to offer advice on Senator Westland's point of order, and I just would offer advice, Mr. President, to you that members can debate the motion. That's what members are debating the motion, and I think it would be more productive for members of this body to allow members to debate the motion in front of the body and not continually interrupt them.
Advice, Mr. President?
Members, I didn't ask for any advice because there's nothing around advice on the motion. She asked for me to remind us.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President?
For what purpose do you rise?
Point of parliamentary inquiry?
State the rule.
Point of parliamentary inquiry?
Yes. Go forward. State the rule.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are you asking for my question, or you want at the point of parliamentary inquiry?
Senator Lucero, if it's a point of parliamentary inquiry, what rule are you referring to? And then go forward.
So you want the rule in Masons that is the point of parliamentary inquiry?
Yes, because I think we're now going far off, because I did allow Senator Rasmussen to at least want to give me advice, but she rose asking under 5.1 for us to be reminded. And there's nothing for me to rule on. She asked for me to remind the body. Under 5.1, that's the section of the rule that Senator Nelson has brought her motion. So there's nothing that she's asking me to do other than to remind us under Rule 5.1. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. So point of parliamentary inquiry is so prevalently used in this body that I hadn't thought that I would have to cite the rule for that. I don't have that at the tip of my fingers because it is so prevalent. So I will sit down and I will rise in about 60 seconds once I find it. Thank you.
Senator Lucero, if you'd like to state what your reasoning is for even your parliamentary inquiry, is because there is no advice, there's nothing that she's asked me to do. So, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. And it has been brought to my attention, it's Masons section 150 for points of parliamentary inquiry. So rising under that, Mr. President,
State your inquiry.
The question I was going to ask you, the inquiry I was going to ask you is advice appropriate when a member rises and interrupts another member with a point of order?
The answer is no. Because there's nothing, so she's supposed to rise with a rule, which she rose under 5.1 and asked for the body to be reminded as to where we are and what is before the body. So there's nothing there for me to rule on, because that's the very rule that Senator Nelson has asked for this motion to come forward. So I don't need any advice.
Another point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President.
Senator Lucero.
Is it in order that a member rises, interrupts another member, and cites that they want the body reminded versus having a ruling on a point of order?
If I am understanding what you're saying, when Senator Westland rose and asked for the body to be reminded under 5.1, is the same thing that Senator Rasmussen asked me to do, which was to refer back to Rule 5.1 so that the body would know that even when you're debating a motion to remove something from one committee to the floor, that there should be some latitude given so that they can make some inquiry around or at least talk about why. And as long as it sticks to the motion itself and not go out for statistics and not do all these other things. Those are things you debate in the committee if a bill is before you. So the bill is not before us. That's why there are some restraints around what we should be talking about and not be talking about.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to be certain because as I'm listening to the debate, I am interested in the stories that help to influence my decision to vote for or against the motion before us, and I need to hear those stories, such as what Senator Westrom was including. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Westrom, you bring up something, Senator Lucero, you bring up something that I think is a part of the challenge here. When you're bringing a motion from a committee and you're asking for it to come to the floor, we are not debating the substance of the bill. And even stories related to that, if there's a way to just connect it, like I think, who was it, who just, did a really good job at the end of saying, hey, because there's track season coming up, I think this is important for us to do it right now. That was at least to the motion that is before the body as opposed to the substance of the bill. So we have to make that distinction. So with that being said, Senator Westrom, I hope it didn't throw you off or for you to go any further, but you have to stick to the underlying motion, and if you would be so kind as to do that. Senator Westrom.
Well, Mr. President, and the public watching knows the Democrat tactics are to throw us off and try to mix the messaging. But I will finish with my story because if you recall what I said, and if Senator Westland would remember, I started it by saying one of the reasons it is urgent to bring this bill to protect women in Minnesota sports was because of the news story I saw this morning that was quite disturbing. We are hearing more and more of these stories. So I was trying to paraphrase the story for the senators as we debate whether it's urgent or not, or should we keep this issue bottled up in Education Committee? That's what we're discussing here, Mr. President. And to finish my story, which I was just about done with, was that there was a biological male, I think it was 58 years old, according to the news story this morning, in Virginia, now in the women's locker room with teenage girls changing, and he's standing in the middle of the locker room naked. And it's very obvious to anybody in the locker room, per the story, that this person is not a naked lady. I don't have to explain it anymore. Mr. President, it is stories like this that we continue to hear more and more, why this is an urgent issue to bring forward, and the legislature should deal with protecting biological girls and biological boys in the right sports in Minnesota. In conclusion, it's as simple as this. There is a book titled, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Mr. President, members, we do not need to debate this anymore. Every kindergartner could figure this out. And everything we needed to know about this topic, we learned in kindergarten. Let's bring it to the Senate floor. Let's quit bottling it up and seeing the gymnastics the Democrats will do to block this. Everything we've heard from the Democrats is against this motion. I'm urging some of them and Republicans, let's bring this from committee to the Senate floor and vote on it now.
Thank you, Senator Westrom. Before I go to Senator Port, the person I was trying to remember who made a statement that connected the motion and to the statements, it was Senator Klein, so he did a really good job of doing that. Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. The argument has been made today that we should move with urgency because of state tournaments and track seasons and sports seasons, and that's exactly why we should be thoughtful and deliberate. Moving with urgency in order to try to pull girls, because trans girls are girls, off of teams where they have worked and trained with their teammates for months and years as they're reaching the pinnacle of their sports is cruel. And I don't believe that it's the Senate's intention to be cruel. I hope it's not. And so we should move with deliberation, with process, and with an ability for communities to speak up, to share their voices through the committee process. Vote red.
Members, remember, we're talking about Rule 5.1, and the motion before the body is whether to take a bill from the committee and bring it to the Senate, to general orders. Senator Dibble, to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would urge a no vote to the Nelson motion to discharge Senate File 916 from committee and place it on general orders. Because, Mr. President, I think it would be important to ask Senator Nelson about the language of her bill, which gives anyone an unlimited right to challenge the sex of an athlete participating on a team. Mr. President, I think it's important to ask Senator Nelson what exactly that means, that anyone can just show up and say, I think that little girl is a boy because of what that little girl looks like. Mr. President, I think it'd be important to ask and to hear from the public about whether or not it's appropriate to put families to the expense of a medical examination that has no medical benefit, and that's what Senator Nelson really intends to do. Mr. President, I think it'd be important to really explore the question of setting a blanket standard of exclusions that have no scientific basis, and why Senator Nelson would propose to do that. But most importantly, Mr. President, I think it'd be important to ask the author and to hear from the public about why trans people do not deserve full and equal participation in all aspects of public life. Why it's important to not fulfill the lessons that we all learned in kindergarten, as Senator Westrom just cited, to not be cruel, to not exclude people, to not ostracize them, to not pile on to all of the hate and effort to exclude people from the public life of our country, where we're all equal in the eyes of the law, to why should we as a Senate participate in the efforts to do everything possible that's going on right now in this country to destroy the lives of trans people. So they cannot exist in public spaces, they cannot participate fully and equally, they cannot access the love of their family or their doctors. Mr. President, I think that would be an important public hearing to have in committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, again, we are debating the Nelson motion. And the motion before the body is whether Senator Nelson's bills should be removed from the committee and then placed on general orders. Senator Lucero, I'm sorry, Senator Nelson has stood up.
What I would say, Mr. Chair, is that we've heard an immense amount of discussion today. I think that points to the very importance of this issue to all Minnesotans, to women, girls, their parents. And I appreciate your latitude in allowing some discussion. But the bottom line, Mr. President, is that this needs to be on general orders so that we can ensure that we have the actual full debate that I know you have been trying to gain from the rostrum there. And so, Mr. President, this is essential that we move forward with this. And I want to be very clear. There's nothing about hate for anyone. This is about protecting Title IX as it was intended, and that is to protect women and girls. And so, but I do want to remind the body that this is not the vote on this important issue. You can tell, Mr. President, that there's a lot of interest in how important this issue is for women and girls. And so that is why, members, we need to get this on the general orders. And when it comes to the Senate floor, every one of you will be able to stand and talk about why this is important to protect women and girls in sports, whether it be competition, privacy, respect. We all will have points of view, and you've heard other points of view as well today. But Mr. President, it is essential that we get this on general orders. So I just want to clarify that this is not the debate, members, on the bill. This is simply asking that it be put on general orders so that the debate amongst this body that Minnesotans are asking for. They want to hear. They want to know how we're going to protect Title IX in women's sports. So I just want to remind the body of that, Mr. President.
So, Senator Nelson, thank you. I thought you were going to say something else because I had an order in which I was going in, and you being the author, I wanted to respect you and what you were doing. So, with that being said, it doesn't appear that there's any other motion. I'm now going to Senator Lucero. Members, if you'd be so kind as to make sure that we are looking at the motion that is before us. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in favor of the motion to protect girls and women. There is an urgency. This is very urgent. Just this weekend, Mr. President, I responded to an email from Nicholas, a constituent of mine who lives in St. Michael. One of the sentences he wrote is, "It's despicable adults in charge of our children's safety dismiss the scientific fact that biological males are stronger than females and expose female athletes to risk of injury. 25 to 60% more muscular strength." And he goes on. So I am in favor of this motion. I support, Mr. President, members voting green because this is urgent, because this is a safety issue for girls and women. We absolutely want to stand in support to protect all girls and women across the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. We'll now go to Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in favor of Senator Nelson's motion to move this bill to general orders. As we've listened today to lots of debate about the underlying bill, it reminds me of my children. I have two daughters. They both play, well, one plays hockey and one's going to start hockey next year. The season is coming to an end. The thing that I find most important about this bill is, and why I think we should have this debate, is that we do have a pressing timeline in the fact that scholarships and things like that for schools are going to be decided very soon, if not already working on being decided. And so this decision ahead of us could have direct impact on some students' eligibility for scholarships or ineligibility for scholarships. And so with that, I support Senator Nelson's motion, and I look forward to getting a chance to actually debate the underlying bill. Thank you.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Just very quickly, urgent is a relative term. When we say something is urgent, we are saying it is more urgent than other things. Reporting from Greater Minnesota and from my neighbors, we're a lot more concerned about the price of eggs.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a father of a daughter and a grandfather of a granddaughter, I rise in support of Senator Nelson's motion to bring this bill, Senate File 916, to the floor for immediate consideration. Mr. President, the bill that Senator Nelson would like to bring to the floor amends Statute 121A.04, Section 121A.04, in our education statutes. And this is urgent, Mr. President. As many know, just last month, the President of the United States brought executive orders that could bear upon the state of Minnesota in a variety of budgetary areas. This is one of them. So, Mr. President, if we could fix the things that are incongruent with that executive order, we would take Minnesota out of the perils that have been developed for our laws in our state because of the egregious and unending efforts last session of Minnesota Democrats to pass their radical leftist ideology into the law of the state of Minnesota. That effort has placed our laws and our people in their pocketbooks at peril today. This is a way that we can act to remove one of those perils. The question is, are we going to undo the perils that were passed in the last 2 years so that we don't have that financial exposure as a state? Or are members of this legislature going to, again, stick their head in the sand because it is their ideology that was passed into law?
Point of order, Mr. President.
For what purpose do you rise, Senator Latz?
Point of order under Mason, Section 491, Paragraph 4.
491, say it one more time there, Senator Latch.
Section 491, Paragraph 4.
Speak to your point of order.
Mr. President, this is the Masons' counterpart to our Senate Rule 5.1. It is much more specific than our Senate rule is, and it merits reviewing. Seems to me Senator Drazkowski is speaking out of order according to Mason's 491, Paragraph 4. It is not in order to discuss the merits of a proposal upon a motion to discharge a committee or withdraw the proposal from the committee. Debate in such cases must be confined strictly to the purpose of the motion, for if this were not true, the merits of any proposal could be forced under discussion merely by such a motion to withdraw. Mr. President, I want to emphasize, debate in such cases must, under Mason's, be confined strictly. The current senator is going well beyond the motion before us, relitigating past conduct of the Senate, motions and decisions of this Senate. It's not focusing strictly on the motion before us, and I ask the President to so rule and to end this debate from Senator Drazkowski's point of view and anyone else who decides to go beyond the motion before us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, I will give a gentle reminder, but the next time I will rule, because I think that Senator Latz is correct under 491.4, which is what I've been saying for quite some time, is that our debate has to be based on the motion and not on the underlying merits of the proposal or the proposed bill. So that, again, is under 491.4. Senator Drazkowski, I hope that you would take that as a gentle reminder because it sounded like you were getting ready to come to a close. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Mr. President, are the rules higher than Mason's, or is Mason's higher than the rules?
Well, Senator, both are important when we think in terms of interpreting as to one's actions. And Masons can be can walk alongside our rules, because if you look at our Rule 5.1, it talks about what can happen as far as a person being able to bring a motion to take a bill from a committee and ask for it to be placed on general orders. But we're not supposed to debate the underlying proposal that is in the committee, but I've given some latitude that would allow you to say some things. But when we start going to debating what we did last year versus another year, I don't think that adheres to Mason's, which clearly says that debate in such cases must be confined strictly to the purpose of the motion. And so the purpose of the motion is to take a bill from the committee and put it on general orders. Senator Drazkowski.
Further inquiry, Mr. President.
State your inquiry.
Mr. President, is custom and usage higher than Mason's, or is Mason's higher than custom and usage?
So, Senator Drazkowski, to your first question, and then we're not talking about custom and usage at this particular time, but let me answer the first part of your question again that I think would be helpful. If you look at our temporary rules of the Senate, if you look at Rule 1, It says that the rules of parliamentary practice contained in the most recent Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure govern the Senate in all cases in which they are applicable and in which they are not inconsistent with those rules and orders of the Senate and the joint rules and orders of the Senate and House of Representatives. That's why I use the term that Masons walks alongside of our rules, especially if there's nothing inconsistent about Masons and what we have in our joint rules. Senator Jaskowski.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I will have to find the reference, Mr. President, because we'll have more of these debates, I'm sure, as we proceed through session. But I have read and understood over my years in this legislature that the order of precedence, the order of hierarchy is the Minnesota Constitution, number one. Minnesota state laws next. Minnesota rules next. Custom and usage next. And Masons, the last of the ones we consider out of those. So please, Mr. President, keep those in mind. Also keep in mind, if you will,
Senator Jaskowski, as you state that, that's why I read rule number 1, because your rules, which is the Senate rules, says that how Masons is supposed to interact with our rules. So that is what I have in mind, and I just hope that you would take a read of that since you so eloquently talked about you haven't read it. So read Rule 1 and how these two things interplay with each other. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will read Rule 1 again, and I will also read the reference that I mentioned to you that I understand to be the way we operate around here. And speaking of that, as we look at the way we've been operating around here, I will suggest, Mr. President, my remarks have been tighter to Rule 5.1 than 90% of the discussion that we've had so far. So before I was interrupted, Mr. President, I was talking about the fact that we need to act on this urgently to avoid the billions of dollars potentially that we could run aground here in the state of Minnesota. This is an urgent matter. Additionally, Mr. President, just last week, the Attorney General of the United States sent a letter to our state Attorney General about the incongruence of our laws here in the state of Minnesota with the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Have we thought about that, members, Mr. President, as we look at this motion being brought forward by Senator Nelson, one that would remove, again, a law that places us in jeopardy with the federal government? This law and its need for change, places us, Mr. President, in jeopardy with the federal government. We need to bring this before us today and pass it in order to avoid that hazard that has been placed before us by earlier legislatures. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'll make some additional comments once we hear our last person, which will be Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Swedzinski stand for a question?
Senator Jasinski?
Senator Swedzinski.
Senator Swedzinski, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Swedzinski, when do you have Senate File 916 scheduled for a hearing in the Educational Policy Committee?
Senator Swedzinski.
It is not scheduled.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, this bill was introduced over a month ago and referred to that committee. If the process outlined by several members today were allowed to happen, we would be having this debate in committee and this motion would not be necessary. The reason Senate File 916 needs to be moved to general orders today is because the vetting of that bill is not being allowed to occur in committee with the debate and consideration that so many members here have outlined. It seems if we really want to have a debate on the merits of this bill about protecting women's sports, then the Senate floor is the only place that debate is going to be allowed to happen. And I think that's why it's so important for us to consider Senator Nelson's motion today, because it is not working through the committee process, and this is the only place that we will be able to have that conversation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Swazinski, last person, before I have some comments. Senator Swazinski.
Yeah, I just want to, as chair of Ed Policy, I got a couple quick comments to make about some of the issues that came up on the floor today. And I just want to remind there is a thing higher than the Minnesota State Constitution, and that is the U.S. Constitution. And the 14th Amendment says no state shall deny any of its people the equal protection of the law.
And I'm just going to remind you, Senator Swazinski, we're talking only to
okay.
the motion that's before the body. Senator Swazinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to that, I just want to reiterate that there's never been a hearing request to me as chair, and during responsibility sharing, when the GOP did control the committee, we never heard this bill. So I'd like to remind the audience of the sense of urgency seems a little disingenuous. Thank you.
Members, we are on the motion from Senator Nelson to move this bill from the committee to general orders. Members, this is also a good time for me to make sure that Senator Nelson and the rest of the body understand something. Senator Nelson, I ask that you go to Rule 36.5. Go to 36.5. I will read it for you. I will help out. Members, this is also for all of us, because we talk about the rules, and I know I've granted some latitude today around the underlining notion of debating rules, but this particular motion is a motion, and under 36.5, a member may not speak more than twice on the same question on the same day. So, Senator Nelson, you've spoken twice.
I will speak to the bill.
I'm going to let you say it, but this is the last. I want to put everyone on warning that if we're on a motion, you cannot speak more than twice. And Senator Nelson, as I always do in my practice, is make sure we go to the author of any bill motion that they have the last word. But you jumped in on my list and you wanted to speak then. So just as long as that we're clear, so that I'm not creating a situation where people are able to say, well, you let Senator Nelson speak more than twice on the motion, I want to make sure that we're really clear about that. Briefly, Senator Nelson, to the motion so we can vote.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm just wondering when I will be the last speaker. I just want to make sure I'm the last speaker. So if I'm the last speaker, I'll speak now. If not, just let me know when, and I'll be glad to pop up at the right time.
So now you are the last speaker, but the time before you were not the last speaker. When you jumped up, I thought as the author that you were going to say something else other than what you said when you went into some other discussions, which is appropriate when you're the last speaker. That's the reason why I let authors be the last speaker, so they can hear all the debate. So Senator Nelson, you're the last speaker before we take the roll.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Well, members, you'll be clear from the discussion today that this is a matter of urgency and of great importance. And I do want to note that a hearing request obviously has been sent. And of course, if this should be getting on to general order so we can have the full debate. That's all I ask, Mr. President, that we allow Minnesotans to hear the debate and we allow members to get this in front of the body. Not today, just go into general orders. I encourage a yes vote.
The Secretary will take the roll on Resolution 916. Senator Hoschild, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report no for Senator McEwen.
Senator McEwen votes no. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Coleman votes aye.
Senator Coleman votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Miller votes aye.
Senator Miller votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 33 ayes and 34 nays, the motion to withdraw does not pass. Members, can I?
President, would this be a time to ask Senator Swedzinski to yield? Just wondering if there will be a hearing?
Not at this moment. If you give me a minute, Senator Nelson, but just in case you didn't hear, that was a question that was asked by Senator Pratt of Senator Swedzinski, and then he got up later.
There was no hearing. I'm just wondering when there will be a hearing.
Let me make a couple things clear, and then we can come back to your question, Senator Nelson. Is that okay? Okay. Members, I recognize that we sometimes have issues that come before this body where we are really passionate about it. It's important to us, and I don't disagree with that at all. But here's what I'm asking you to do, because it is important for all of us to make sure that we maintain the dignity and the respect of this body. The first thing that I want us to remember, members, when someone else is speaking, that you don't just stand up just to interrupt them. That's why I'm asking, what rule and what purpose do you rise? We are not to rise and just to be disruptive to whoever is speaking. So I want to make sure that we're clear about that. The other thing that I want us to be very clear on, and Senator Latz made this also clear, and I'm thankful that he at least provided a rule even when I was speaking to it, is Section 491 of Mason's point 4. So in the future, when we are dealing with a motion or whatever is before us, that it is confined, our comments should be confined to what is before the body. Because it is important for these things to be done orderly. So I want to make sure that we are clear on that, because I have an expectation that we're going to adhere to that going forward. Senator Nelson, you want to stand and ask the question of Senator Swedzinski. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Senator Swedzinski, yield.
Senator Swedzinski, will you yield or not? Yes, he will yield, briefly. Senator Nelson, because this is really not in order, but I'm allowing it to happen. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Swedzinski. My question is simply, will you grant this bill a hearing? Can I count on getting a hearing in your committee? Can Minnesotans expect that?
Senator Swedzinski.
As I told, thank you, Mr. President, and as I answered already to Senator Pratt, the answer is most likely no, but come talk to me. And I'm just, as long as you ask the question, and I'm going to take 30 seconds here, Senator May Quaid said something that I found really disturbing about this discussion, and I wonder today if the suicidal hotline numbers that are on the back of every student
Senator
ID,
Swedzinski.
Can I?
Senator Swedzinski, there's a question that was asked.
The answer is no.
Thank you. With that being said, we are remaining under motions and resolutions. Senator Murphy, to designate special orders.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bills be made special orders for immediate consideration. Members, the list is on your desk.
Members, true to form, the list is on your desk for special orders. We will begin with Senate File 1360, Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have an amendment, but first, just an overview of Senate File 1360 is simply to align all of the speed limits for agricultural, farming, and timber industry vehicles to a uniform 35-mile-an-hour speed limit across the state. And to that, I have the A1 amendment also, Mr. President.
Senator Johnson Stewart offers the A1 amendment. The Secretary will report the A1 amendment.
Senator Johnson Stewart moves to amend Senate File number 1360 as follows. Page 1 after line 5, insert. This is the A1 amendment.
Senator Johnson Stewart, to your A1 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The A1 amendment simply includes a technical and conforming change. There is one other place in Minnesota statute that mentions a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit for these types of vehicles, and this changes it to 35 miles an hour, as does Senate File 1360.
Any other discussion on the A1 amendment? Senator Westrom to the A1 amendment.
Mr. President, would the author yield?
Senator Johnson Stewart, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, Senator Johnson Stewart, can you tell me, does this cover UTVs that are being used on the farm at all? Utility terrain vehicles? Are they in your amendment or in the bill as it's written overall? I'm getting more and more questions on that from farmers that use those pieces of that as machinery for rock picking and other things, checking fields, and so I'm just curious if we're covering them as well.
Senator Johnson Stewart to the question.
1 minute.
Doesn't make any changes to the types of vehicles.
Yeah, it makes, to Senator Westrom's question, Mr. President, this does not make any other changes to the types of vehicles. It simply raises the speed limit across the board in every one of our counties to a uniform 35 miles an hour. Just as an aside, State Patrol is in favor of this and testified at our hearing. Mr. President.
Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, thank you, Senator Johnson Stewart. I just wanted to ask, because many of those UTVs will go more than 35 miles an hour, and I just wanted to make sure we're not somehow grouping them in a new group as well, and I think that wouldn't probably make sense. Many other pieces of farm equipment would be limited by other transmissions and other issues that wouldn't be the same. So just thanks for that clarification.
Any other questions or discussion on the A1 amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the A1 is adopted. We are now on Senate File number 1360 as amended. Any other discussion? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
Senate File number 1360, a bill for an act relating to public safety, increasing speed limit for implements of husbandry to 35 miles per hour.
Third reading. Any other discussion? Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had a hearing on this in the Senate Transportation Committee. We're in support of this bill, but I will remind members this is Senator Ann Johnson Stewart's first bill on the floor. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll. Members, please vote. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Coleman votes aye.
Senator Coleman votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Miller votes aye.
And Senator Miller votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There have been 65 ayes and 0 nays. The bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, we will now go to Senate File 823. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the intersection at U.S. Highway 169 and Minnesota Highway 282 is one of the most dangerous in the state. There's a stoplight at this intersection and is the only traffic signal in an 80-mile stretch between St. Peter and Anoka. The corridor is extremely important to the Minnesota economy. In fact, 50% of our agricultural product at some point in time travels on this highway, much of it to the ports of Savage, which is in Senator Port's district. More importantly, this highway is a safety issue. Members, I handed out 2 articles to you for your viewing. The stoplight and the flow of traffic have led to several devastating accidents. The change in this bill is very technical and very simple. It simply changes the funding from Scott County directly to MnDOT, who will be managing the project. Making this very simple change will assure that this project stays on time and on budget. I want to thank Senator Dibble for giving this bill a hearing so early in session. Mr. President, there was no opposition in the Transportation Committee to this bill, and it has support of the 169 Coalition, which represents almost all of the communities along this highway. And Mr. President, I would just like to conclude by saying it's a good bill, vote green.
Any other discussion on Senate File Number 823? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the Senate File Number 823 its third reading.
Senate File Number 823, a bill for an act relating to transportation, modifying appropriation for construction of an interchange at marked U.S. Highway 169.
Third reading. Any other discussion? Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of Senate File 823. Again, thank you to Senator Dibble for hearing our members' bills this early in session. We appreciate working across the aisle with Senator Dibble and the rest of the committee.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll.
Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Coleman votes aye.
Senator Coleman votes aye.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Miller votes aye.
Senator Miller votes aye. Senator Johnson, are you going to vote? All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, we will now go to the 13th order of business, announcements of Senate interest. Any announcements of Senate interest? Without objection, the following senators will be excused from today's session. Senator McEwen from 12:15 until the end. Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Just a reminder, once again, tomorrow is Mardi Gras, and we celebrate this on the 3rd floor in my office suite. You're all very, very sincerely welcomed. Let the good times roll.
Any other discussion or announcements of Senate interest? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Rest yield for a question?
Senator Rest, will you yield? Senator Rest? Will you yield? Yes, she will yield. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wondering, Senator Rest, in light of tomorrow's celebration, what would be the most appropriate jacket color to wear?
Senator Rest, to the question.
Gold, purple, green. One or together.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Senator Rest, since I have all 3 of those colors, you have not made my selection choice any easier, but I'll find something.
We're certain that you will make a wise choice, Senator Lucero. Any other announcements of Senate interest before we go to Senator Murphy? Senator
Eichhorn?
Eichhorn.
Yeah.
Senator Eichhorn.
We
Sorry
serve on
about that,
committees
Senator
and
Eichhorn.
stuff together. You should get that. Anyway, tomorrow, Minnesota Forest Industries has a reception at CHS Field from 4 to 8 p.m. Hope folks come out and hear from folks in the forest industry about all the things going on there, and there will be some heavy appetizers. So if you like to eat, they'll get you taken care of.
Thank you, Senator Icorn. Any other announcements of Senate interest? Seeing none, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. A reminder for everybody that there is a lunch in MSB 2308, the caucus room on the second floor, to welcome and celebrate our interns. I understand pizza will be available. So members, if you can, go have some pizza and say thank you. And then, Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until Thursday, March 6th at 11:30 a.m.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Senate is now adjourned.